Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin. Tjong-Alvares with the top reports. Today's show, Gazans resort to innovation as the economy remains weak, and Yangon's upcoming public transport revolution. First, the headlines. IMF Chief Christine Lagarde said major advanced economies were doing better thanks to cheap oil, currency shifts, and low interest rates that encourage investment. Lagarde noted that the long-struggling Eurozone had a better than anticipated fourth quarter and might rebound further. She added that there are risks on the horizon, pointing to geopolitical turmoil and the diverging monetary policies of major economies. Countries and corporates that borrowed extensively in dollar-denominated loans are likely to suffer as the U.S. Federal Reserve prepares to raise borrowing costs.
About an hour ago, the board meeting of the IMF approved the Ukraine program that will provide additional financing for 4 years and hopefully help that country restore its situation, provided that stability can be maintained thanks to the ceasefire and Minsk agreement that was hopefully negotiated with great skills by leaders, including sitting next to me. Thank you.
Lagarde also announced a new $17.5 billion four-year aid program for Ukraine. The new loan will be heavily front-loaded, with about $10 billion to be disbursed in the first year. And the White House on Wednesday also said the U.S. would send $75 million in new non-lethal military assistance to the Ukrainian government. The U.S. recently expanded its sanctions list to include officials from the former Russian-backed Ukraine government, as well as Russian nationals who have been backing separatists. Emergency talks on extending Greece's huge bailout began on Wednesday as Athens scrambles to put together enough cash to the end of the month. The goal of the talks is to find a framework on how to proceed and a detailed timeline, including specific data. If Athens satisfies its creditors, it could receive the €7 billion in rescue financing still remaining in its bailout and start talks on securing a third bailout program. But the radical Syriza party swept to victory on pledges it would refuse dealings with the hated Troika. And while money remains tied up, Greece renewed attacks on Berlin, threatening with asset seizures over war reparations claimed by Athens.
Deutschland ist sich seiner historischen Verantwortung.
Germany is conscious of its historic responsibility for the suffering that the Nazi regime inflicted in several European countries, but that doesn't change our position and our conviction that the question of reparations has been clearly and definitively resolved.
Mexico's central bank said it will sell $52 million per day over the next 3 months to stop the peso from sliding further after reaching historic lows. The peso hit record lows in recent weeks, reaching the lowest point since March 2009, when the country was in recession. The Mexican currency has depreciated by 4.8% to the dollar since the start of the year, but has strengthened against the euro, the Canadian dollar, and the Brazilian real. The daily auction comes on top of a mechanism in which the bank sells $200 million on days that the peso drops by 1.5% from the previous day's closing price.
The fundamental goal is to preserve the stability of the Mexican economy.
South Korea's central bank cut interest rates for the first time in 5 months on Thursday in hopes of boosting sluggish growth. The Bank of Korea slashed the base rate by 25 basis points to 1.75% as indicators show little evidence that Asia's fourth largest economy is rebounding. Rates were lowered twice last year, but given poor exports and growing worries over deflation, the Bank of Korea felt more was needed to boost the economy. South Korea's annual inflation slowed to a 16-year low in February, though much of it was due to low commodity prices rather than weak consumption.
We felt that more was needed to boost the momentum in the current recovery. Looking ahead, the committee will conduct monetary policy considering economic growth, the price situation, and paying attention to financial stability.
The summer war between Hamas and Israel came at a high cost to Gazans, and as Hamas remains at odds with Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and foreign aid barely trickles in, Gazans are forced to be more innovative. Shelby Wiener brings us the story.
One result of war in Gaza has been a reversal of growth in the Palestinian economy. A report from the World Bank cites the restriction of trade and a drop in foreign aid as contributing factors to the decline. Factories and businesses have begun to close their doors because of this economic downturn, and many workers have been laid off. Unemployment in Gaza is now at 38.5%, and countless individuals and families are having a difficult time to make ends meet. The situation is forcing people to look for new sources of income to help support daily life. Some of the traditional ways of making money are becoming increasingly harder. Jobs, such as shopkeeping, are harder because not as many people can afford to buy their goods.
Today, people can't afford food, so they also can't buy gold. A worker that actually has a job makes 20 to 30 shekel per day, which is not enough to feed a family and not enough to bring gasoline to have electricity in the house.
One way people in Gaza have been earning extra money is by selling their valuable possessions and jewelry. Jabbar Fahid, who owns a jewelry workshop, realized he could use this to help his own business problems after being cut off from the trade.
We used to deliver our products to Hebron and buy from there. Everything was fine. We were allowed to import and export through Nachal's crossing, and it was easy. But now the Israelis are preventing us from both importing and exporting.
Goldsmiths in Gaza used to get their supplies from Hebron, but they lost access after Israel tightened the blockade in 2007. Fahid now buys the old jewelry from those trying to earn extra money and uses it in his workshop. He recycles the jewelry and gold into more modern and fashionable pieces. There are now 5 workshops in Gaza that have turned to recycling jewelry. The recreated jewelry is then sold back into Gaza's market.
Declines in the Swiss franc, European bonds, and Chinese performance have made investment in these environments comparatively cheap, creating lucrative opportunities for savvy global investors. Tal Kenan, founder and CEO of investment management firm Clarity Capital, joins us on the phone for more. Mr. Kenan.
Hi, Binyamin. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with the Swiss franc. How did the currency soften, and what implications does it have?
Well, the Swiss franc move was, of everything you just mentioned, is probably the most violent of kind of the recent market moves. And that happened because the Swiss central bank, the Swiss National Bank, was keeping a cap on the appreciation of the Swiss franc at 1.2 euros. And on January 15th, and kind of in a surprise move, you removed that cap. Really sending the Swiss franc up by the end of the day about 23% against the euro, which in currency market terms is a huge move. Hurt a lot of people, helped a few people, but I think that's been kind of the biggest, most violent move from those that you've mentioned.
Okay. Well, staying in the Eurozone, I mean, government bond yields in the Eurozone have plummeted to record lows since the European Central Bank started purchasing government debt as part of a 60 billion euro a month quantitative easing program. It basically was meant to stimulate the Eurozone's sluggish economy, but negative interest rates sweep across Europe. Investors are effectively paying government bond issuers for holding their debt. I mean, what's the story there?
Yeah, that's right. So in many of the Eurozone countries, we're seeing now negative yields on most short-term government bonds, meaning kind of 2 to 5 year debt. You give the government, 100 euros, it promises to give you back 99. And people are buying this. By the way, in the extreme case in Switzerland, we're seeing negative yields on 10-year debt.
Why are people buying this? What is the incentive?
Right. Well, so first of all, there's certainly a lot of fear in the market right now, and bonds are typically considered a safe haven investment. I think very few people actually see real value in these bonds. We could see in the near term, depending on the size and duration of the European Central Bank's quantitative easing program, we could see further compression, further negative rates. Although negative 20 basis points is the cap. Mario Draghi, the European central banker, has indicated that in the quantitative easing program, there will be no purchases of bonds that are trading at below 0.2% yields. So that's kind of a cap on where things could go, which basically says, we really have one direction to go on bond yields, which is up longer term.
Right.
The question is how long it takes.
Okay, well, now on the last comment here, I mean, Chinese growth dropped to its lowest in 24 years. Will we see a further slowdown, and how can investors profit from it?
Right, so good question. I mean, certainly Chinese shares have been beaten up recently, and there's been quite a bit of volatility, quite a drop 2 days ago as well in Chinese shares or global equities. It's going to be an interesting story to watch in China. Everything is linked. You're right. We are going to see probably in 2015 the first dip below 7% in Chinese GDP growth in the last 20 plus years. So that is potentially a big deal. That 7% by many economists has been viewed kind of as a magic number for sort of the sustainability of the Chinese economic model.
Okay.
We'll see. I mean, but it's all linked. At the end of the day, if Europe doesn't start growing, if Japan doesn't start growing, it's going to be very difficult to see Japan.
It'll be interesting to actually see how this all plays out. Tal Keinan, founder of Clarity Capital, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Yangon's Circular Railway might clank around the city at a pace barely faster than a brisk walk. But this creaking relic of colonial times is at the heart of a multi-billion-dollar plan for a public transport revolution in the car-choked metropolis.
A commuting crush on Yangon's increasingly congested streets. Here in Myanmar's commercial hub, there's been an influx of cars since the end of junta rule 4 years ago. That makes for a grueling journey for the tens of thousands who rely on sweltering buses to get into work. Many are now turning to a long-neglected legacy of colonial times, the train.
I ride the train because the car traffic is so bad. There's nothing to block the way on the railway.
Yangon's Circular Railway was built under British rule, which ended in 1948. As with most of the city's public services, the network was chronically underfunded by the former military government. But an initiative to replace the rusting windowless old trains with new air-conditioned models was launched 2 years ago. And it seems to be bearing fruit.
We're particularly focused on getting trains to be punctual, cheap, and easy for passengers to travel into the city.
But the Circle train doesn't reach enough neighbourhoods to be the silver bullet to Yangon's transport problems. A new riverfront tram line has been built, while better bus routes and traffic lights are also on the cards. As part of their development commitment to Myanmar, Japan has drawn up a 20-year master plan for transport upgrades. The proposals could cost billions of dollars, money that would have to come through aid, loans and partnerships with private firms.
Everybody following, including Japanese company, private sectors, everybody are worried about the lack of infrastructure in Yangon cities, lack of electricity and lack of transportations.
Yangon is a magnet for international investment, and Myanmar knows that it will have to act decisively if it is to keep up with the city's accelerating aspirations.
And we have not heard the last of Apple yet. We're joined now by Daniel Roth in Media Watch for more on Apple. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so what's the story with Apple?
Well,
more bling?
Apple has been in the news over and over again this week, of course. They had the Spring Forward event. Almost immediately after that, at an Apple shareholders meeting, The Verge reports that shareholders were looking to get Apple to buy Tesla. Tesla Motors, the electric car company, so far has been the most successful electric car company. Also a premium brand. We spoke earlier in the week about Apple and HBO being these premium brands and natural partners.
Right.
Apple and Tesla, also premium brands. They have this sort of elite feel to them. And shareholders were saying, Apple, we've got $180 billion in our pockets. That's how much we have to spend. Why don't we go ahead and buy Tesla?
Why would Elon Musk want to go ahead with this, considering this is one of his jewels, so to speak? I mean, he's not exactly lacking for money.
Right. I think it's not a fully thought through move, if anyone was thinking about it as that. Apple's been buying companies at a huge rate, 23 companies in 15 months. Right. So I think they're just looking for this. But of course, Apple's also building a car. They're building a car section to their company. They've been trying to poach from Tesla, and Tesla's been trying to poach from Apple.
Sure.
So it might be a more hostile environment between these two premium companies than maybe between HBO and Apple.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Also, Daniel Roth, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And that takes us to the end of this Economy Magazine. Thank you very much for watching us. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Send us your comments, have a say in our show, and join us again for more on the economy next week.